Welcome to NoteFull's YouTube video series. My name is Lauren and I'm a tutor at NoteFull.com. Each week, a tutor from NoteFull presents some student submissions here on YouTube, and we review it for all of our student community. So for those of you who are interested in taking part in next week's video, be sure to stay tuned until the end where I explain exactly how you can do that. Now let's go ahead and get started with this week. So what we're going to be focusing on today is writing, and I'm creating this video specifically for those of you out there who are looking for a score that it meets the requirement of a 24 or above, right? A lot of you are out there struggling, not really quite reaching a 24 and not really sure why that is. So I'm creating this video to explain that. I'm going to be featuring 2 student submissions today, just one paragraph of each, where I'm going to be focusing on the difference between a 23 and a 24. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so for this week's video, I'm going to be focusing on this question here. It has been announced that a new manufacturing factory will be built near a park in your neighborhood because of the open space. Do you support or oppose this plan? Use details and examples to support your explanation. All right, so this question is long, and for those of you who struggle with time management or get nervous with the length of the question, this is a good one for you. I encourage you to pause the video, set your timer for 30 minutes, and actually try to write this essay like our students did for this week. But let's go ahead and get started now to take a look at the submissions. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be focusing on 2 students' work. This is student number 1, and this is our 23 score. So the first thing I want to do for you guys is explain exactly what the student is doing well, what the student needs to repeat, and what you should learn from this student. So this student has a really phenomenal structure, right? You can see that the student starts with an intro, which is second, and explaining that reason. The next thing the student does is explain the example, right? It says, for example, a couple sentences in. And the next thing the student does is explain that example, and then we see at the end that there's a conclusion, right? The student says, to sum up, all right? So that we definitely think the student is doing a great job with. Another thing the student is doing well is basically expanding the words, right? Now, expanding our word count is not the only thing that we want to focus on, and it's not even that we're expanding the words just because we want to expand the words, right? What the student does really well is actually use a lot of details, and details, as you should know, mean good vocabulary, right? So if you just look at this paragraph really quickly, you can see that there's a super wide range of different words, right? We have a lot of details, we have numbers, places, so this student does that very well. Now, this student might be wondering, well, why am I still getting a 23? If I'm doing what NoteFull says with my structure, if I'm doing what NoteFull says with my word count, and if I'm doing what NoteFull says with the details and the vocabulary, what is holding me back? Well, for this student, the reason why this student is struggling is because there are grammatical issues. Now, that may not be the comfortable answer or the answer that a lot of students like to hear, but unfortunately, that is it. Right? When we look through the student's writing, we can see a number of problems. I see the student has a lot of difficulty with article use, sometimes inconsistent, right? Using them maybe inaccurately, changing up a and the, right? Or not at all. Right, so this student needs to review article use. And remember, it's not so much that this is a major issue, but it's an issue that's consistent. It happens a lot. So those computer raters are going to knock off point after point after point if we have that issue that frequently. Another thing is just some minor things that kind of come up, not minor, I wouldn't say minor, but they come up not often, but they do come up and they will contribute to point loss. So for instance, in the second sentence, it says this tax will ultimately going, right? So we can't say will going to use. We have to either say will do something, right? Or we will say this tax is going to be used, right? Something like that. So you have some verb awkwardness. Another sentence here is actually incomplete. And those are the kind of sentences that do contribute to point loss that's more significant than, say, one article that's misused. So you can see that in actually the second to last sentence, where every person could participate in different activities without any kind of entrance fee. That's an incomplete thought, right? It seems like it's connected to some other point, right? Because we begin with the word where. All right, so this student, if you're wondering why you're getting a 23 or below and not able to boost your score up, this is the reason why. So be extra careful with these issues. Create a checklist, know where your issues are grammatically, and start improving those elements, okay? As I said, this student would get a 23 out of a 30. Okay, so now let's take a look at student number 2. So for those of you who know that this is going to be the 24, right, I already announced that at the beginning of this video. The problem here with the difference between these two students, I think a lot of students are going to say, hey, the word count is so much lower, right? And that is true. This student actually had the same word count overall, but for this particular paragraph, the word count was much lower. Another thing that is important about this, or different about this essay from the previous one, is that the vocabulary is not as strong, okay? You can see that the student doesn't really use personal experience. The student doesn't demonstrate a wider range of vocabulary. And you can see some words like community repeats a lot of times. But having said that, what this student does really well is actually communicate much clearer, right? So this student is not making as many grammatical mistakes. This student has a really powerful and effective use of the English language. Sure, there is a little bit of repetition with the words, and I can sense that the student maybe doesn't know how to expand the paragraph through personal experience, but once this student does that, this student is probably going to shoot up his or her score even beyond the 24, because this student has mastered the conventions, or I should say the rules of English, and is applying them pretty much almost precisely 100%. There's a couple of errors here or there, but they're not too big, and they don't affect my understanding of what the student is trying to communicate. So you want to remember that when you are trying to get a 24 above, like the student does. So for today's TOEFL review, I have a couple of tips which I want to remind you guys, and this I think will be very useful for you to use as a checklist. So copy this down, put it next to your desk or wherever you're working, and make sure you remember this when you're writing your essays in the future for practice. So remember, increasing your word count is very important, right? We want to maintain a strong structure as well, so be sure to keep that in mind. But there's other elements, even if you are following those things. We want to make sure our vocabulary range is wide, right? This means we're using wider range of ideas, not just general kind of content. We want to talk about specifics. Another thing we want to do is use linking phrases well. I didn't go into detail about this too much, but student number 2 had some really powerful linking phrases, all right? And you want to make sure you're doing that as well. You're not just kind of following a format and then telling a story, but you're also kind of linking these ideas together through linking phrases. Next and final point is to keep track of your grammar difficulties. If you're the sort of student who's struggling, you're going to need to create a list of the issues that you have as a writer. All right, just following a structure, just shooting for a word count, these sort of things are great, but they're not going to earn you a high-level score if you're not using high-level English. And that's something we all have to take away when we want to improve our writing. Okay, so now I've reached the end of the video. I hope you really enjoyed the video that I created this week. For those of you who want to participate and aren't sure how to do that, I'm going to explain exactly what you should do. So you'll find that there's a description box in the area below, so be sure to click on the link to our forum. What you can do then is sign up. It's free of charge, of course. You can go ahead and create an account there and submit your essays and your speaking responses each week. We post questions and tasks, and each week there's going to be a place for you to submit it, and we're going to take from all of the students who submit maybe 1, maybe 2, just some work so that we can review it here on the video. So if you want to participate, go ahead and click that link below. If you like this video, click like, and if you are not subscribed, be sure to do so. So we look forward to seeing you again next week, and we hope to receive some great submissions for next week's video. Bye-bye.